The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of a meeting at work. I saw Riverside Manor on the caller ID and my stomach immediately tightened. You know that feeling when you just know something's wrong? That's what I felt before I even answered. Ms. Patterson, this is Linda Chen, the director at Riverside Manor. We need to discuss your grandmother's continued placement here. Her voice was professional, measured, cold. I'm afraid we're going to need you to find alternative housing for Mrs. Patterson within 30 days. She can no longer remain at this facility. I stepped out of the meeting room, my heart pounding. What? What are you talking about? What happened? Your grandmother's behavior has become disruptive to the community. Other residents have expressed that they feel uncomfortable around her, and we have a responsibility to maintain a peaceful environment for everyone. Uncomfortable. That word echoed in my head. My 79-year-old grandmother, who weighed maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, who'd spent 40 years as an elementary school librarian, was making people uncomfortable? This is the story of how my grandmother was pushed out of her nursing home, not because she needed more care than they could provide, not because of any medical reason, but because she was Black and she refused to be invisible. And it's a story that happens more often than any of us want to admit. If you care about how our elderly are treated, especially our Black elders, please subscribe to this channel. And tell us in the comments what city you're listening from. Your voice matters in this fight. My grandmother, Evelyn Patterson, wasn't just any woman. She was a force wrapped in 5 feet 2 inches of pure determination. Born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1946, she grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. She told me stories about hiding under her bed when the church bombings happened, about her mother walking miles to clean white people's houses while her father worked in the steel mills. She was the first person in her family to finish high school, and she did it while facing teachers who told her Black children didn't need education beyond 8th grade. She became a librarian because, as she told me, books don't see color, baby, and every child deserves to see themselves in a story. For 4 decades, she worked at Washington Elementary, creating reading programs, fighting for funding, making sure every child, especially the Black and brown ones, had access to books that reflected their experiences. She retired at 65 with plaques and letters from parents thanking her for changing their children's lives. Grandma Evelyn lived independently until she was 77. But then she had a stroke, a small one, but enough to affect her mobility and leave her right side weakened. She needed help with daily activities, and living alone wasn't safe anymore. My mother and I worked full-time. My uncle lived 3 states away. We made the painful decision that breaks so many families. We started looking at nursing homes. Riverside Manor seemed perfect. It was a newer facility, clean and bright, with a diverse staff, and what they called a culture of inclusion. The marketing materials showed smiling residents of different backgrounds participating in activities together. The monthly cost was steep, $3,800, but they accepted Medicaid after the first year, which meant we could manage it. The director, Linda Chen, gave us a tour personally, emphasizing how they celebrated diversity and treated every resident with dignity. Your grandmother will thrive here, Linda said with a warm smile. We have a book club she'll love. For the first month, things seemed good. Grandma had a nice room with a window overlooking a courtyard. She attended activities, bingo, movie nights, the book club Linda had mentioned. When I visited on Saturdays, she'd tell me about the other residents she'd met, the meals she liked or didn't like, the physical therapy that was helping her regain strength in her arm. But then, gradually, things changed. The first sign was subtle. I arrived one Saturday to find Grandma sitting alone in the common room while other residents gathered in a group near the windows. "Why aren't you over there?" I asked. She shrugged, but something flickered in her eyes. "Just didn't feel like it today." The next week, same thing. Grandma alone on one side of the room, the group on the other. When I suggested she join them, an elderly white woman glanced over and whispered something to the person next to her. They both looked away quickly when they saw me watching. I asked Grandma about it later in her room. "Are people being unfriendly?" "Some people are set in their ways," she said carefully. "It's fine, baby. Don't worry about it." But I did worry, because I knew my grandmother. She'd spent her life making spaces for herself where she wasn't necessarily welcome. She didn't shrink. She didn't hide. If she was sitting alone, something was wrong. The third week, I arrived to find her in her room instead of at the Sunday afternoon concert that was supposed to be happening in the main hall. "Why aren't you at the music program?" I asked. "Didn't feel like going." "Grandma, you love music." She looked at me with tired eyes. "I'm just resting, Jasmine. That's what old people do, right? Rest." There was an edge in her voice I didn't like. A resignation that didn't sound like her at all. I went to find a staff member and ran into Patricia, one of the aides who'd always been kind to Grandma. "Patricia, is everything okay with my grandmother? She seems different." Patricia glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Have you talked to Linda?" "About what?" "Just, maybe you should check in with administration." That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I walked straight to Linda's office. She wasn't there, but her assistant scheduled a meeting for me the following Tuesday. "What's this about?" I asked. "Linda will discuss everything with you then," the assistant said with a tight smile. I left Riverside Manor that day with a knot in my stomach. I called my mother on the way home. "Something's happening with Grandma. I don't know what, but something's off." "She seemed fine when I talked to her on Thursday," my mother said. "When did you last visit in person?" A pause. 2 weeks ago. "Work's been crazy." I understood. We were all doing our best, juggling jobs and families and trying to visit as often as possible. But we'd missed something, and I was about to find out just how much we'd missed. That Tuesday, I took off work and arrived at Linda's office at exactly 2 p.m. She greeted me with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes and closed the door behind us. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Patterson. I wanted to discuss some concerns that have arisen regarding your grandmother." "What concerns?" Linda folded her hands on her desk. "We've received multiple complaints from other residents and their families about Mrs. Patterson's behavior. She's been confrontational, argumentative, and has made several residents uncomfortable with her comments about race and discrimination." I stared at her. "Comments about race? What does that mean?" "She's accused staff members of treating her differently because she's Black. She's brought up slavery and segregation in conversations with other residents who found it inappropriate. And she's been vocal about feeling unwelcome here, which has created tension in the community." My grandmother, talking about her lived experience, being told it made people uncomfortable. "Has she been aggressive?" I asked. "Has she threatened anyone? Has she been physically inappropriate in any way?" "No, but verbal disruption is still disruption. We have residents who come from different backgrounds and different time periods, and not everyone is comfortable with certain topics." "You mean not everyone is comfortable with Black history?" Linda's expression hardened slightly. "I mean not everyone wants to discuss controversial topics during social activities. Your grandmother has made several residents feel like they're being accused of racism when they're simply trying to enjoy their time here." I felt heat rising in my chest. "Give me an example." "One specific example of what she said that was so terrible." Linda pulled out a file. 2 weeks ago, during a book club discussion, your grandmother stated that the book they were reading, a historical romance set in the 1950s, glossed over the reality of what life was like for Black people during that time. She said, and I quote, "This book pretends segregation didn't exist. That's erasure, and I won't pretend along with it." Several residents left the book club upset, so she pointed out a historical fact. She disrupted the activity and made people uncomfortable. "Maybe people should be uncomfortable," I said. "Maybe that discomfort is called learning." Linda's expression went completely neutral. "Miss Patterson, I understand you're upset, but we have a responsibility to all our residents. Your grandmother's behavior is creating a hostile environment." "For who?" "For white residents who don't want to hear about racism. I'm not going to engage in that kind of rhetoric. The fact is, we've had multiple complaints. We've tried to address this with your grandmother, but she's been resistant to modifying her behavior. At this point, we don't believe Riverside Manor is the right fit for her needs." That's when she told me, 30 days. Find somewhere else. They were evicting my grandmother. I left that office shaking with rage. But I didn't know yet that the complaints weren't really about what my grandmother said. They were about who she was, and what I was about to discover would make everything so much worse. I drove straight from Riverside Manor to my mother's house. She was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in, and one look at my face told her something was catastrophically wrong. "They're kicking Grandma out," I said. They're giving us 30 days to move her. My mother's knife clattered against the cutting board. What? Why? I explained everything Linda had said, the complaints, the accusations that Grandma was making people uncomfortable, the claim that she was being confrontational and disruptive. My mother listened with growing disbelief. Your grandmother has never been disruptive in her life, she said. Firm, yes. Direct, absolutely. But disruptive? That doesn't make sense. That's what I thought. So I'm going back tomorrow to talk to her. Really talk to her. Because something else is going on. The next morning, I called in sick to work and arrived at Riverside Manor at 9 a.m. Grandma was in her room, sitting in the chair by the window, staring out at nothing. She looked smaller than I remembered. More fragile. Grandma, we need to talk. She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Defeat. They told you, didn't they? She said quietly. They told me you're being asked to leave, but I want to hear it from you. What's really happening here? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she started talking, and what came out broke my heart. It started small, she said. Little things. A woman named Dorothy, white lady, nice enough at first, asked me where I worked before I retired. I told her I was a librarian. She said, "Oh, how wonderful. Was that at a special school?" Special school. Like she couldn't imagine I worked at a regular elementary school with all kinds of children. Grandma's hands trembled slightly in her lap. I let it go. I'm used to that kind of thing. But then it kept happening. Another resident, Margaret, asked if I needed help reading the menu because some people struggle with that. I have a college degree, baby. I taught children to read for 40 years. But she assumed. Did you say something? I told her I could read just fine, thank you. She got offended, said I was being sensitive. I closed my eyes. What else? During movie night, they were showing a film set in the 1960s. Beautiful movie, but it didn't show any black people. Not one. Like we didn't exist. I mentioned it to the woman sitting next to me, just a comment, nothing harsh, and she said, "Does everything have to be about race? Like my existence is political." Grandma's voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. The book club was the worst. We were reading this romance novel, and the whole thing was about this white couple falling in love in Mississippi in 1955. Mississippi, Jasmine. 1955. Do you know what was happening to black people in Mississippi in 1955? Emmett Till, I said quietly. Emmett Till. And so much more. And this book just ignored all of it. Made it seem like everything was moonlight and magnolias. So I said something. I said we couldn't pretend that history didn't exist. That erasure is a kind of violence. How did people react? 3 women got up and left. One of them said I was ruining the fun. The book club coordinator, nice young white girl, means well, pulled me aside after and said maybe I should try to focus on the positive aspects and not bring up difficult topics. I felt fury building in my chest. They're telling you not to talk about your own history. They're telling me to be quiet, to smile and nod and not make white people uncomfortable with the truth of what this country did to us. What it still does to us. Grandma looked at me with weary eyes. I thought maybe here, at the end of my life, I could just exist. Just be myself. But they want the acceptable version of a black elder. The one who doesn't remember too much. The one who doesn't speak up. Did the staff say anything? Patricia's been kind. But the others, when I mentioned that I felt like I was being treated differently, they got defensive. We treat everyone the same here, they said. Which is part of the problem, baby. When you treat everyone the same, you ignore that some of us have had different experiences. That some of us need different kinds of respect. I reached over and took her hands. Why didn't you tell me this was happening? What were you going to do? I'm 79 years old, living in a nursing home. This is my reality now. I thought I could handle it. I've handled worse. She paused, but then Linda called me into her office last week. Said I was creating a negative environment. Said other residents' families were complaining. Told me I needed to adjust my attitude, or they'd have to reconsider my placement. She threatened you? She said it nicely. Professional. But yes, she threatened me. I stood up, pacing the small room. This is discrimination. This is absolutely discrimination. It's always been discrimination, baby. It's just dressed up in nicer words now. They're not saying we don't want black people here. They're saying I'm disruptive, confrontational, making people uncomfortable. It's the same thing, just wrapped in politeness. I thought about all those marketing materials. Culture of inclusion. Celebrating diversity. It was all performance. They wanted diversity they could put in brochures, but they didn't want the reality of what it means to truly include people, to hear their stories, to acknowledge their pain, to make space for their truth. Has anyone else here experienced this? I asked. Are there other Black residents? 3 others. Mr. Washington down the hall, he keeps to himself, doesn't cause any problems. Mrs. Lewis in the East Wing, she has dementia, so she doesn't say much. And Mrs. Chun. Wait, Linda Chun. The director. No relation. Mrs. Chun is Chinese. She told me last month that residents kept asking her where she was really from and touching her hair without permission. She complained to staff and was told people were just being curious and friendly. A pattern. This wasn't just about my grandmother. This was systematic. I spent the rest of that visit talking to Grandma, taking notes, documenting everything. Then I started walking the halls, observing. I noticed things I hadn't seen before, or hadn't wanted to see. The way staff members' voices changed when they talked to white residents versus residents of color. The way activities were centered around white, Middle American culture with no acknowledgement of other backgrounds. The way the photos on the walls showed diverse faces, but the actual experience inside was anything but inclusive. I found Patricia in the hallway and pulled her aside. Can we talk? Off the record. She hesitated, then nodded. We stepped into an empty activity room. What's really going on with my grandmother? I asked. Patricia looked exhausted. Your grandmother told the truth. That's what's going on. And people here aren't used to hearing it. Is this about race? Everything's about race when you're one of the few Black residents in a predominantly white facility. But nobody wants to say that out loud. She lowered her voice. I've worked here for 3 years. I've seen this happen before. Black residents get labeled as difficult or aggressive for behaviors that white residents do all the time. White residents complain about food. They're being discerning. Black residents complain. They're ungrateful. White residents talk about their past. They're sharing memories. Black residents talk about discrimination. They're being divisive. Why doesn't anyone stop it? Because the families complaining have money and influence. They threaten to leave, to write bad reviews, to pull their parents out. And administration listens to money. Patricia's eyes were sad. Your grandmother didn't do anything wrong. She just refused to pretend. And that's not allowed here. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandmother spending her final years in a place that wanted her to erase herself, that wanted her quiet and compliant and grateful for the bare minimum of care. I called my mother and my uncle. We had a family meeting over video chat. We need to document everything, I said. Every incident, every complaint they've made about her, every example of differential treatment. And we need to find her a new place, but not just any place. Somewhere that will actually see her, actually respect her. Do those places exist? My uncle asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. The next day, I went back to Linda's office. This time I had questions. I want copies of every complaint that's been filed about my grandmother, I said. Written documentation. Dates, specific incidents, who complained and why. Linda's expression was carefully neutral. Those are internal records. My grandmother is being evicted. We have a right to know exactly what she's being accused of. The complaints are documented in her care file, which you can request through proper channels. I'm requesting it now. It will take time to compile. How much time? Up to 30 days. I almost laughed. You're giving us 30 days to move her, and you're saying it might take 30 days to tell us why. I understand your frustration, Miss Patterson. But we have protocols. You have protocols for evicting residents, but you don't have protocols for addressing racism. Linda's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. We stared at each other across her desk. Finally, Linda said, your grandmother was given multiple opportunities to modify her behavior. She chose not to. We have a responsibility to all our residents. All your white residents, you mean. This conversation is over. You have 27 days remaining. I suggest you use them to find appropriate placement. I left that office knowing exactly what I had to do. If they wanted to play by the rules, I'd play by the rules. But I'd also make sure everyone knew exactly what those rules protected and who they punished. I spent that night researching elder care discrimination and found an attorney who specialized in civil rights cases. But what she told me about fighting nursing homes made me realize just how powerless families really are when institutions decide they don't want you anymore. The attorney's name was Keisha Williams, and her office was in a modest building in downtown Atlanta. She was in her early 40s, with natural hair pulled back in a professional bun and eyes that had seen too many stories like mine. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I did. Everything my grandmother had told me, everything I'd observed, everything Linda had said. Keisha listened without interrupting, taking notes in swift, precise handwriting. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression that was both sympathetic and grim. "Ms. Patterson, what you're describing is absolutely discrimination. It's also incredibly difficult to prove and even harder to remedy through legal channels." My heart sank. Why? Because nursing homes have enormous power over residents, and the law gives them wide latitude to determine appropriate placement. They're not evicting your grandmother for being black, not explicitly. They're evicting her for being disruptive. And that word, disruptive, is so subjective that it's nearly impossible to challenge. But the pattern matters. But patterns are hard to prove without extensive documentation, witness testimony, and comparison data. Do you know how other residents who've complained have been treated? Can you prove that white residents who voiced concerns weren't similarly reprimanded? I thought about it. No. I only know about my grandmother. Exactly. And that's what these facilities count on. Isolation. Every family thinks their situation is unique, so they don't compare notes with other families. By the time anyone realizes there's a pattern, the residents involved have already been moved out. So what can we do? Keisha leaned forward. We can fight, but you need to know what fighting means. It means filing complaints with the state licensing board, which takes months. It means potentially filing a discrimination lawsuit, which could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. And during all of that, your grandmother would likely still need to move because judges rarely grant injunctions to keep someone in a facility during litigation. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. So they win. They just get to kick her out, and there's nothing we can do. I didn't say that. I said legal recourse is limited, but there are other forms of power. Keisha pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is a journalist I know who covers elder care issues. She's done several pieces on discrimination in nursing homes. If you're willing to go public, that's often more effective than lawsuits. Facilities hate bad press. Would my grandmother have to be involved? Ideally, yes. Her testimony is the most powerful. But I understand if she doesn't want to put herself through that. I thought about Grandma, already exhausted, already defeated. Could I ask her to fight publicly when she just wanted peace? Let me think about it, I said. I spent the next few days visiting Grandma every day, documenting everything I could. I talked to the other black residents when I could find them. Mr. Washington was quiet and guarded, but he did mention that he'd been warned about being too demanding when he'd asked for staff to stop calling him by his first name without permission. "I'm 82 years old," he said. "I'd like to be called Mr. Washington, not George. But apparently that's difficult." Mrs. Chun, the Chinese resident, was more open. "They treat me like a perpetual foreigner," she told me. "I was born in San Francisco. My father fought in World War II. But residents constantly ask me to teach them Oriental words or tell them about my culture, like I'm here to educate them." "Have you complained?" "Once. I was told I should feel honored that people were interested in learning about Chinese culture. Like being othered is a compliment. I documented all of it. I also started watching how staff interacted with different residents. I noticed that when Mrs. Henderson, a white woman, complained loudly about her meal being cold, a staff member apologized profusely and brought her a fresh, hot plate. When my grandmother mentioned her meal was cold, she was told, "It's probably fine, just give it a minute." I noticed that white residents were addressed as Mrs. or Mr. consistently, while residents of color were often called by their first names, regardless of their preference. I noticed that when a white resident wanted to skip an activity, it was respected. When Grandma wanted to skip an activity, staff asked if she was isolating and suggested she needed to participate more. Death by 1,000 small cuts. That's what it was. No single incident dramatic enough to call out, but cumulatively devastating. I also requested documentation from Riverside Manor. They provided some of it, a 2-page summary of behavioral concerns that included: resident made inappropriate comments about racial topics during social activities. Resident expressed dissatisfaction with facility repeatedly, creating negative atmosphere. Resident resistant to staff suggestions for improving social integration. Not one specific quote. Not one detailed incident report. Just vague accusations wrapped in professional language. I showed it to Keisha. "This is exactly what I expected," she said. Vague enough that they can claim documentation, specific enough to justify eviction. It's a template. A template. I've seen this exact language in cases from other facilities. It's how they build a paper trail without actually documenting discriminatory behavior. That's when I made my decision. I talked to my grandmother. "Grandma, I found a lawyer. And a journalist. If you're willing, we can fight this publicly. But it would mean telling your story. All of it. To people you don't know." She was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at the courtyard she'd soon be leaving. "Baby, I'm tired," she finally said. "I've been fighting my whole life. I'm so tired. I know. And if you want to just move quietly and find a better place, I'll support that completely. This is your choice." She turned to look at me. "But you think we should fight?" "I think if we don't, this keeps happening. To other people, other families. I think your voice still matters, but only if you want to use it." Grandma reached over and took my hand. "Your grandfather used to say, 'Evelyn, you're going to talk yourself into trouble one day.' And I always said, 'Better trouble for truth than peace for lies.'" She smiled, but it was sad. "I guess I'm not done talking yet." So we did it. I contacted the journalist, Rachel Morrison, who worked for a regional news outlet that covered social justice issues. She came to meet Grandma at Riverside Manor, and my grandmother told her everything. Rachel recorded the whole interview. She also contacted Riverside Manor for comment. Their response was predictable. "We maintain a diverse and inclusive environment for all residents." Mrs. Patterson's discharge is based solely on care needs and behavioral concerns unrelated to race. We wish her well in her future placement. But Rachel didn't stop there. She contacted families of other residents, current and former. She found 3 other families who'd had loved ones asked to leave after voicing concerns about treatment. 2 were Black. 1 was Latina. All had been labeled difficult or disruptive. She also filed public records requests for state inspection reports and found multiple citations for inadequate care, though nothing specifically about discrimination, because those complaints are nearly impossible to prove and rarely investigated thoroughly. The article ran on a Thursday morning. "Are nursing homes silencing residents of color? Families say yes." It featured my grandmother's story prominently. It included her photo, strong, dignified, looking directly at the camera. It included quotes from other families. It included Riverside Manor's denials and the inspection citations. And it included something else. A quote from a former staff member who'd left Riverside Manor 6 months earlier. She spoke anonymously, but she said, "There was absolutely a double standard. White residents were seen as having preferences. Black residents were seen as having problems. And if you tried to address it, you were told you were being too sensitive or didn't understand the culture." The article went viral within hours. Local news picked it up. National elder care advocacy groups shared it. Riverside Manor's social media pages were flooded with comments, some supportive, many critical. And 3 days later, I got a call from Linda Chin. "Ms. Patterson, in light of recent developments, we'd like to revisit our decision regarding your grandmother's placement." I almost dropped the phone. Revisit? We believe there may have been some miscommunication about the situation. If your grandmother is willing to participate in a mediation process with the residents who express concerns, we'd be open to her remaining at Riverside Manor. I felt something hot and sharp in my chest. You want her to apologize? I want to find a resolution that works for everyone. My grandmother doesn't need to apologize for existing, for having a voice, for speaking truth. Ms. Patterson, we've already found her a new placement. somewhere that actually values who she is. So no, Linda, we won't be revisiting anything. My grandmother deserves better than Riverside Manor, and now everyone knows it. I hung up before she could respond. Moving Grandma wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something bigger than I ever expected. Because once her story was out there, other families started reaching out. And what we discovered about how nursing homes treat Black elders made national news. The day we moved my grandmother out of Riverside Manor, I made sure to arrive during peak hours when families were visiting. I wanted people to see. I wanted them to ask questions. Grandma was already packed. She hadn't accumulated much during her brief stay. My mother and uncle were there to help. As we loaded boxes into my car, I noticed several residents and family members watching from windows and doorways. One woman, white, maybe in her 60s, approached hesitantly. "Are you Dorothy's family?" I tensed, unsure what was coming. "Yes. I read the article. I'm so sorry for what happened to her." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "My mother is here. She's complained about some things too. Not about race, but about care quality. They told her to stop being negative, or they'd have to reconsider her placement. I thought she was just being difficult, but after reading your grandmother's story, I wonder, what's your mother's name?" I asked. She told me. I wrote it down and gave her my contact information. "If she ever needs support or documentation, call me." She nodded, then hurried away like she didn't want to be seen talking to us. As we were loading the last box, Linda appeared with a forced smile. "Mrs. Patterson, we wish you all the best in your new home." My grandmother looked at her with clear, steady eyes. "No, you don't. You wish I'd been quiet. But I wasn't raised to be quiet when something's wrong." Linda's smile faltered. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't feel that way. I know that way. There's a difference." Grandma turned to me. "Let's go, baby. We're done here." We drove her to Magnolia's senior community, a smaller facility about 20 minutes away. It was older, not as fancy, but it had something Riverside Manor didn't: intentional cultural competency training for staff and a resident council that included people of color in leadership roles. The director, a Black woman named Angela Freeman, greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Patterson, welcome. I read your story. I want you to know that here, we don't just tolerate voices, we amplify them." Grandma's room was smaller than at Riverside Manor, but it felt warmer somehow, more genuine. As we helped her unpack, I noticed the photos on the walls in the common areas, genuinely diverse, showing residents of different backgrounds engaged in cultural activities that reflected their heritage, not just the white mainstream. Over the next few weeks, I watched my grandmother transform. Not back to who she'd been before the stroke, that woman was gone, but into someone more settled, more herself. She joined the book club at Magnolia, which had just finished reading Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. She participated in a Black history discussion group. She mentored younger staff members, sharing stories from the civil rights era. "They actually want to hear what I have to say," she told me one Saturday. "They don't want me to be smaller. They want me to be whole." But the story didn't end with Grandma settling into her new home. Because Rachel Morrison's article had opened something. Within 2 weeks of publication, 12 more families contacted her with similar stories. Nursing homes across the region where Black, Asian, and Latino elders had been pushed out for being difficult or disruptive or for not fitting in. Rachel wrote a follow-up article. Then another. The state licensing board announced they'd be conducting a review of complaint procedures at nursing homes. 2 advocacy organizations launched a joint initiative to track racial discrimination in elder care. And Riverside Manor? They hired a diversity consultant and issued a public statement about renewing their commitment to inclusive care. But the damage was done. Several families pulled their loved ones out. Their online ratings plummeted. And 3 months later, Linda Chin quietly left her position as director. Meanwhile, I kept getting calls from families. "How did you know something was wrong? What should I document? Can you recommend lawyers?" I started a simple blog, just sharing information and resources. Within 6 months, it had thousands of followers. One evening, I sat with my grandmother in her room at Magnolia. The sun was setting, casting golden light across her face. "You started something, Grandma," I said. "People are listening." She smiled, but it was bittersweet. "Baby, I didn't start anything. Black women have been speaking up for centuries. We've always been loud, always been right, always been punished for it. I'm just another voice in a very long chorus. Maybe, but your voice mattered. It changed things. Did it? Or did it just shine a light on things that were always there? I thought about that. She was right in a way. The discrimination hadn't started with her. It wouldn't end with her. But visibility mattered. Testimony mattered. Refusing to be silent mattered. A few weeks later, I got a call from a producer at a national news network. They wanted to do a segment on elder care discrimination. They wanted to interview my grandmother. I asked Grandma if she was willing. She was 80 years old, tired from physical therapy, still rebuilding her strength. She had every right to say no, every right to rest. What would I need to do? She asked. Tell your story. On camera. To the whole country. She considered it. Will it help other families? I think so. I hope so. Then I'll do it. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. My grandmother, sitting in her room at Magnolia, speaking in her steady, clear voice about what happened to her. About being told she was uncomfortable for speaking truth. About being pushed out for refusing to erase herself. The interviewer asked, "What do you want people to know about how we treat elderly people of color in this country?" Grandma looked directly into the camera. "I want people to know that we don't lose our dignity when we get old. We don't lose our right to be heard. We don't lose our humanity. And if a system tries to take those things from us, it says everything about the system and nothing about us." That quote was picked up everywhere. Social media, news articles, think pieces. It became a rallying cry for elder justice advocates. But there was a cost. Not just to my grandmother, though the process exhausted her, but to all of us. Death threats via social media from people who called us race baiters, and worse. Anonymous messages telling my grandmother she should be grateful for any care at all. Reviews on my blog from trolls calling me divisive. Is it worth it? My mother asked one night, her voice shaking. Is fighting this fight worth what it's doing to all of us? I didn't have a simple answer, but my grandmother did. Baby, every fight worth having has a cost, she told my mother. The question isn't whether there's a cost. The question is whether paying it moves us forward. And this moves us forward. 3 months after the national interview aired, Congress held hearings on discrimination in long-term care facilities. My grandmother was invited to testify. She declined. "I've said my piece," she told me, but she submitted written testimony that was entered into the congressional record. That testimony included a line that still makes me cry when I read it. I spent my life teaching children that their voices matter. In my final years, I refuse to pretend mine doesn't. If that makes me difficult, then difficult I'll be. My grandmother lived another 2 years after leaving Riverside Manor. What she taught me in those 2 years changed not just my life, but the lives of countless families who found the courage to speak up because she did first. My grandmother died on a Saturday morning in March, 2 years and 4 months after we moved her to Magnolia Senior Community. She'd been declining for a few weeks, the inevitable progression of age and the lingering effects of that stroke years earlier. But she was clear-minded until nearly the end. The night before she passed, I sat beside her bed holding her hand. She was drifting in and out of sleep, but during one wakeful moment, she looked at me and said, "You know what I'm proudest of, baby." "What, Grandma?" "That I didn't let them make me small. At the very end, when it would have been so much easier to just be quiet, I didn't let them shrink me." She squeezed my hand weakly. "Promise me you won't let them shrink you either." "I promise." She smiled and closed her eyes. By morning, she was gone. Her funeral was standing room only. Former students from her years as a librarian, now middle-aged with children of their own. Staff members from Magnolia. Other families who'd fought similar battles after hearing her story. Angela Freeman gave a eulogy that made everyone cry. Mrs. Patterson taught us that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. And she claimed hers until her last breath. In the weeks after her death, I went through her things. Among her belongings, I found a journal she'd kept during her time at Riverside Manor. I'd never known about it. The entries were brief. Her weakened hand made writing difficult, but they were devastating. September 12th. Told a woman today that her comment about those people hurt me. She said I was being too sensitive. But I'm not too sensitive. The world is too cruel. September 18th. Missed another activity. Can't stand the looks anymore. The way they watch me when I speak, waiting for me to confirm their stereotypes or defy them. I'm just tired of being watched. September 24th. Linda called me into her office. Said I need to think about how my words affect others. But no one ever asks how their words affect me. October 3rd. Sometimes I wonder if I should just stop talking. Let them think what they want. But then I remember Birmingham. Remember the marches. Remember that silence never protected anyone. Reading those words, I cried harder than I had at the funeral. Because my grandmother had been fighting even when we didn't know it. Fighting just to exist fully in a space that wanted her diminished. I decided to share excerpts from the journal in my blog. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people who'd experienced similar things, or whose parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles had. The common thread through all of them: invisibility, marginalization, and the exhausting labor of constantly proving your humanity. One comment stuck with me. My father was a civil rights attorney for 45 years. When he went into a nursing home, staff treated him like he couldn't read. They were shocked when they found out his background. Why were they shocked? Because they'd already decided who he was based on his skin color. 6 months after Grandma's death, I quit my job in marketing. I used what little savings I had to start a nonprofit, the Evelyn Patterson Foundation for Elder Justice. The mission: documenting discrimination in elder care, providing resources for families, and advocating for policy changes. It started small. Just me, working from my apartment, building a website and answering emails. But it grew. Other people joined: social workers, attorneys, former nursing home staff members who'd seen things they couldn't unsee. We created a hotline for families to report concerns. We partnered with law schools to provide free legal consultations. We trained advocates to accompany families to care plan meetings and inspections. Within 2 years, we'd helped 47 families document and address discrimination in their loved ones' care. Some moved to different facilities. Some filed complaints that led to citations and corrective action plans. 3 cases resulted in policy changes at the state level. But the work was hard. For every family we helped, there were dozens more we couldn't reach. For every facility that improved, there were others that simply became better at hiding their discrimination. The system was enormous, entrenched, and protected by money and bureaucracy. Still, we persisted. Because that's what my grandmother taught me. Persist even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. One afternoon, I got an email from a woman named Teresa in Colorado. Her mother, a Black woman with Alzheimer's, had been placed in a memory care unit where staff repeatedly called her by another Black resident's name, despite corrections from the family. When Teresa complained, she was told they looked similar and that she was being oversensitive. I walked Teresa through documentation, connected her with an attorney, and helped her file a formal complaint. 3 months later, she sent me an update. The facility had implemented mandatory cultural competency training and had apologized to her family. Her mother had been moved to a different unit with better care. "Your grandmother started this," Teresa wrote. "And because she did, my mother has a better life. Thank you." I printed that email and hung it in my office. On hard days, and there were many, I looked at it and remembered why this mattered. The foundation also started a project documenting stories from elders themselves. We traveled to nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and elder care centers, interviewing residents of color about their experiences. We recorded hours of testimony, stories of being ignored, infantilized, excluded, and silenced, but also stories of resistance, dignity, and refusal to be diminished. We compiled these stories into a report we called Voices at the Margins: Elder Care and the Erasure of Black and Brown Lives. It was 127 pages of testimonies, data analysis, and policy recommendations. We sent it to every member of Congress, every state health department, and every major elder care organization. Some ignored it, some dismissed it, but some listened. And slowly, painfully slowly, things began to change. New regulations requiring cultural competency training, updated complaint procedures with better oversight, increased penalties for facilities with patterns of discrimination. It wasn't enough. It's still not enough. But it was something. And something is better than silence. 5 years after my grandmother's death, I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder justice. The room was filled with advocates, policymakers, social workers, and family members. I stood at that podium and told my grandmother's story. And I ended with this. My grandmother was not a perfect person. She was stubborn and opinionated and sometimes difficult, but she was never wrong for insisting on being seen, for refusing to pretend her history didn't matter, for speaking truth even when it made people uncomfortable. And the fact that she was punished for that, pushed out, labeled difficult, made to feel unwelcome in a place that took our money and promised care, that tells us everything we need to know about how we treat our elders in this country, especially our Black and brown elders. But here's what I've learned in the 5 years since she died. She wasn't alone. There are thousands of Evelyn Pattersons, people who lived full, dignified lives and are now being told they're too much, too loud, too inconvenient, too real, and every single one of them deserves better. This isn't just about nursing homes. This is about what we value, who we see, whose comfort we prioritize, and whose humanity we're willing to ignore. And until we reckon with that, until we center the voices of those who've been pushed to the margins, nothing will fundamentally change. My grandmother once told me, "Baby, they've been trying to silence women like us for centuries, but we're still here, still talking, still taking up space." She was right, and as long as I have breath in my body, I'll make sure her voice, and all the voices like hers, are heard. The applause when I finished was thunderous, but what mattered more were the conversations afterward. The family members who approached me with tears in their eyes saying, "This happened to us too." The social workers who quietly shared stories they'd never felt safe telling before. The policymakers who promised to look deeper at what was happening in facilities in their jurisdictions. Change is slow. Justice is slow. But it's happening. Because my grandmother refused to be silent, and her refusal gave permission to others to speak up too. Today, the foundation continues growing. We have a full-time staff of 7 people, an annual budget of just over $500,000, and partnerships with organizations across the country. We've helped nearly 300 families. We've contributed to policy changes in 8 states. We've trained over 1,000 advocates. But the work is far from done. Every day, I get emails from families experiencing what my grandmother experienced. Every day, I'm reminded that dignity in old age is still something people of color have to fight for, not something that's freely given. My grandmother didn't live to see the foundation. She didn't live to see the policy changes or the families we've helped. But I know she'd be proud, not because we've solved the problem, we haven't, but because we're still fighting, still speaking, still refusing to let anyone be made small. On what would have been her 85th birthday, I visited her grave. I brought flowers, purple irises, her favorite, and I sat there for a long time, telling her about the work we're doing in her name. "You were right, Grandma," I said to the quiet earth. "Difficult is better than silent." Every time, the wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice. That's my girl. Subscribe to this channel if you believe our elders, all our elders, regardless of race, deserve to live with dignity and have their voices heard. Comment below where you're watching from. And if you believe that enough is enough, that we need to do better for our elderly community, write "enough is enough" in the comments. Let's keep fighting together. My grandmother taught me that your voice is your power. And the most dangerous thing you can do to someone is convince them they don't deserve to use it. She never stopped using hers. And because of her courage, countless others found theirs too. This isn't just her story. It's the story of every elder who's been told they're too much, too difficult, too real. It's the story of systemic discrimination dressed up in professional language and policies that protect institutions instead of people. But it's also a story of resistance, of refusing to disappear, of claiming dignity, even when the world tries to strip it away. My grandmother lived 81 years. 79 of them, she was exactly who she was meant to be, brilliant, fierce, uncompromising. For a brief, terrible moment, someone tried to take that from her. But she didn't let them. And neither will I.